Thank you, Britt, for that review. It's much appreciated. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Qualifications-Based Selection webinar focused on interview and negotiation phases of the procurement process. I'm Miranda Patton, and I'm the current president of ACEC California, and also the Chief Business Development Officer for M&S Engineers, which is headquartered in Santa Barbara, California. ACEC is a 70-plus-year-old association dedicated to enhancing the professions of consulting, engineering, and land surveying while supporting the policies that protect the general public. Through legislative leadership, grassroots advocacy, and education outreach efforts, we help over 1,000 member firms build a better California. And today we are excited to co-host this webinar with APWA Region 8 and ASCE Region 9. I would like to start by thanking the planning group that helped put this webinar together with, and that included Shahnawaz Ahmad with SA Associates. Shahnawaz is the former Region 8 Director of APWA and is also a member of ACEC California's QBS Committee. John Blanchard with VIII Associates. He's our chair of the QPS committee. Catherine Shinkai with LPA, who's also currently the vice chair of ASCE Region 9, and Jennifer Horn, our policy outreach director at ACEC California. Thank you for the time and commitment it took to plan this highly anticipated event. I'd like to give a special thanks to our speakers who will be introduced by John Blanchard for their time and expertise. And before we begin the presentations, I would like to introduce past president of APWA, which is Mary Joyce Ivers, to say a few words. Mary Joyce.
Thank you, Miranda, and thank you everybody for being here for this important topic with quality-based selection. Thank you, ACEC, and all the members who helped make this happen. Looking forward to hearing all the great information from our speakers. Just as Miranda had said, American Public Works Association represents all the disciplines within public works, and within our public and private partnerships, it's really important that we connect with the great consultants out there, especially when we're looking to increase our workforce development and to get all these projects done to improve our communities. Just want to let you know that our APWA website, I can put the link in the chat. We have great resources for the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and we cannot do it without the great qualified consultants and partners out there. And I also want to wish all of you a National Public Works Week, which is the week of May 16th, to celebrate all the great work you do in public works. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, MJ. Can you hear me? Yeah, I see Britt's got control of everything here, so that's good. Thank you very much. We're going to have a panel type discussion today. So we have our three panelists. I'm going to go ahead and introduce those folks. So we have Chris Hooke. You might want to wave your hand there, Chris. And he's with he's the Deputy Director for Design and Construction with the County of Ventura Public Works Department. Chris has a bachelor's and a master's degree from Brigham Young University in civil engineering. He's a registered professional engineer with the state of California. Chris worked for Boyle Engineering Corporation in Ventura for 14 years, working in public works for various agencies. Since Boyle, Chris spent the last 23 years with the County of Ventura. And he is currently in roads and transportation as the division engineer. And he's mainly responsible for the design and the construction of the county's road system. He's been both in the public and private sector, of course. He uses qualifications-based selection. He's experienced in interviews and negotiations with consultants, and he's been on both sides of the table. So Chris is also married with 5 adult children, 9 grandchildren. He plays violin and guitar and enjoys history and off-road motorcycling, which you may not have guessed right off. We have Doug Pike with us. Doug is a principal engineer at M&S Engineers. He manages their government services. He's also a registered professional engineer with the state of California. Doug has a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from UC Berkeley, and he has a master's degree in construction engineering management from Oregon State University.
Wow.
Doug has nearly 40 years of experience in the areas of public agency, department administration, public works project management, engineering management, water resources, and transportation engineering. Doug is also a contract city engineer for the city of Greenfield, and he assists as the engineer to the district for the Santa Maria Valley Water Conservation District and the Los Olivos Community Services District. He's served as a contract interim public works director for the city of Solvang, assistant city engineer for the city of Buellton, and the interim general manager for the Los Olivos Community Services District. Doug spent 9 years at the city of Santa Barbara, where he managed capital improvement projects that had a total construction cost of over $25 million. He has extensive experience in public works, understanding of qualifications-based selection, and has experience in interviewing and negotiations on both the private and the public sector sides. Doug loves serving his communities in the region to help provide quality infrastructure services that improve people's lives. He's a volunteer at the Federal Bureau of Prisons and has a background as a planning commissioner and a scoutmaster with the Boy Scouts of America. We also have with us today Tim Haile. Tim is the executive director for the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. You want to wave, Tim? And Tim joined the authority in May 2017 with more than 20 years of experience in the transportation program and project management. He's also a registered professional engineer with the state of California and has a bachelor's in civil engineering from California Polytechnic State University, Pomona. So he is responsible for the overall management of the transportation authority, including implementation of projects and programs identified in CCTA's voter-approved sales tax measures C and J, the growth management program, and the congestion management program, as well as policies and procedures, the board-approved budget, and all administrative functions. He previously served as CCTA's deputy executive director, project, and has more than 23 years of experience in program management, public works, and transportation. Tim is an active leader in the transportation industry. He's served as the communications chair of the Transportation Research Board, Managed Lanes Committee, and board member of the California Transportation Foundation. In 2014, he was named one of the top 20 under 40 engineering professionals in California by Engineering News Record magazine. So thank you for joining us, our panelists. So we're going to go into a Q&A, but before we do that, we have a short presentation just to kind of give everyone an overview of the qualifications-based selection process and what's involved with that. So Gabby, do you want to roll the slides? Do we have the slides available? I guess you can see them, but I don't see them.
Yes, they are up, John.
Okay. Let's see if I have something in the way. Well, I'm going to go from memory, Gabby. Here I have a hard copy, so I'll just assume everybody can see them just fine. So QBS is a competitive procurement process It's governed by two key laws. On the federal side, the 1972 Brooks Act was passed mandating the use of QBS when hiring design professionals on federally funded projects. And in California, we have the Little Brooks Act, which was passed subsequently by the California voters. And the key aspect of the California law is that notwithstanding any provision of the law, professional services shall be hired on the basis of demonstrated competence and the professional qualifications necessary for the satisfactory performance of the services required. And the key takeaway there is that there should be no consideration for cost at any point in this process. Go to the next slide, Gabby.
I am on the next slide, John.
All right. So the benefits of QBS, it prioritizes public safety by considering qualifications, and it helps to create safe, durable, cost-effective, and sustainable projects. QBS projects have been shown in a recent study by ACEC that they're most likely to meet all construction milestones with no adjustments to the schedule or cost. QBS projects are more likely to have moderate to significant levels of innovation by the professionals doing the design. And these projects were more likely to have high to very high satisfaction from the project owners or the agencies that use the method. For non-QBS projects, there's of course a more likelihood for schedule delays and also for cost growth during construction. Next slide, Gabby. So the typical steps in a QBS process, and these are kind of outlined for state agencies in the law, but the first step is the agency has an identified need for a project and defines the professional services that would go with that. They'll issue a qualifications package in step 2, which is published and sent out to firms that may have the expertise needed to deliver the project. The agency then reviews the statement of qualifications that they've received. They rank those consultants and from highest to lowest using an established evaluation criteria. Once they've created a list, they'll typically invite 3 firms at least to interview with the agency. This step is sometimes skipped, and a lot of agencies will select their shortlist or the #1 firm off of the written submittal alone. And after the firms are ranked numbers 1 through whatever, then they begin the negotiation with only the #1 highest ranked firm. And the goal of that negotiation is to arrive at a fair and reasonable price for the scope of services that have been requested. If those negotiations fail for whatever reason, the agency can terminate those negotiations with the #1 firm and then move on to begin the negotiations with #2. And that process can be repeated with other firms if they're unsuccessful in those negotiations. So that's our general overview. Thank you, Gabby. And I'm going to just start asking our panelists some questions. So when we're going through here, we have Tim and Chris, who are on the public side, and Doug, who's our private sector representative. So let's start with talking about the interview process. We've gone through the steps, and so I guess, Tim, I'll let you kick it off. And does your agency typically use an interview process as part of the procurement process? And if so, what do you feel the benefits of that are?
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, we at CCTA, we do use an interview process for most of our A&E professional services procurements. The times where we've not used interviews is more on the, I'll say, administrative professional side of the house. But when it comes to project-based selection or quality-based selection for a lot of our A&E projects, we do use the interview process. We take it very seriously, and I think really the benefits is really an opportunity for the interview panel to better understand the consultants' proposals, their concepts, as well as qualifications by staff as we're kind of interviewing, going through the interview process. Obviously, we get to ask a number of questions, and we typically do, and I may be jumping around here, I apologize, John, but we typically do ask the same questions to all of the interviewees as part of the process. And I think by that, we're able to understand really objectively, how they're responding to the questions and really understand, really how one team can really either score or perform better than other teams during that process. And so I think the other benefit of the interview process, which I know there's a question about this later, but the in-person and virtual, it also has a lot of challenges to it. But I think really the other true benefit, I think, of the interview process is you get to know the team. You get to know who you're going to work with as part of the overall process.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. When you're asking your pre-prepared questions, do you allow the consultant to ask questions back, or is it strictly question and answer?
So we do allow, typically what we do is we go through a series of questions. We do allow the interview panel to ask any specific follow-up questions relative to their responses to that question. And then we typically reserve some time at the end of the interview to allow the consultant to ask any follow-up questions that they might have. So we do want to have that two-way interaction during the process. I think it adds a lot of value to the process because as you start to have a conversation, I think you begin to see how the team works together. I think that's an important element of the interview process, is to really understand, the project manager, is the project manager going to really kind of take that leadership role with the overall team? And also really, how does the overall team, interact with one another? Are they able to work well together, answer the questions together? So that way you really see the teamwork that you're going to hopefully get during the actual project.
Okay. Chris, what about County of Ventura? Do you typically run interviews or?
Yes. Yeah, we feel the interview is an important step in getting to know the consultants. There is a lot of communication that's when you're able to do it in person. There's body language. There you can observe how the team interacts. We also, by consultants coming to an interview, it shows their interest in the project. Now, if we're doing interviews and a consultant is far away, let's say they're not in Southern California, we would allow a virtual participation in that interview process. That's okay, but we prefer to do it in person.
COVID? Even before COVID, or has that always been the county's?
We developed it during COVID, I suppose. I can't remember doing virtual interviews other than we did interviews for personnel who are applying for jobs, let's say somebody in New York. But for teams interviewing for projects before COVID, we did them always live, now that I think about it. But today we would be open to that if there was a reason that a consultant requested to do it virtual. Let's say they're from Dallas or somewhere outside California, we would agree with that.
When you decide to interview, what are you hoping to get from maybe the interview that you don't see in an SOQ?
In an interview, you have an opportunity to ask for clarification or more information about things that may have been mentioned in the SOQ, but an agency will have in their mind awareness of what issues are especially important in this project. And in the interview process, they can drill down and ask questions about those issues that in an SOQ you wouldn't have an opportunity to do. And you can follow up on the answers from the consultant and explore further in an interview, which is very helpful.
And then I guess for either of you, how many firms do you typically invite for the interview?
We only invite 3. Having been on the consultant side for 14 years and many times interviewing and not being selected for projects, I know there's a lot of effort, and we try to minimize the burden to the consultant community. So we only interview 3.
You do anything different, Tim?
No, I agree with Chris. I think, I used to be a consultant as well for about 14 years. And so I really understand the level of effort and financial commitment it takes to really pursue, these projects. And so we try to really limit the number of firms that we interview, whether that be either 2 or 3 firms. It really depends on, the scoring of the proposals in terms of whether we will interview 2 or 3, but we typically limit it to like three firms.
Okay. So if it's a master services agreement or an on-call, do you typically award to one firm, or do you have contracts that go to multiple firms? And if so, is there a maximum number of firms that you allowed to be qualified, I guess?
You want to take that, Tim?
Sure. We typically, through an on-call process, it really depends on multiple factors. I think it depends on the amount of work that we're going to anticipate as part of the on-call. And I think that really kind of drives the decision of how many firms that we would actually shortlist. But we depending on the work, for example, on our project management office, our PMO consultant, we typically pick one consultant to help us with our PMO. But when we do an actual A&E civil type on-call or an environmental on-call, we will usually pick about, on average 5 to 6 firms. But again, like I said, that really depends on the amount of work that we're going to have as part of that on-call. And usually what we do is we look at our outlook over the next, typically we like to do an on-call about every 5 years. Usually it's a 3-year contract with 2 1-year extensions. Most likely if the team stays intact and the teams are doing well and performing well, we'll usually extend the contracts those additional 1 years. And so as part of that, we typically like to do it every 5 years. In fact, actually this year we're getting ready to actually renew our A&E on-call contracts because it's been about 5 years or so.
All right. What about you, Chris, at the county? Do you do anything different, or?
Yes, we do it a little different. We require we have a program of annual contracts. They're actually 18-month-long contracts, and we hire a pool of consultants. But before we create an annual contract with a consultant, we have a policy that we hire them 3 times by standalone contracts. And that is always done through the normal competitive process. And then once they have had 3 projects with us or 3 standalone contracts, then we will create with them an annual contract, a master agreement. And we have just under 40 consultants in that pool of under master agreements, and we do not competitively select for giving out task orders under the master agreement.
Okay.
we have many specialties. So there will be surveyors, landscape architects, general civil, and so forth in that pool. And we try to spread around the work so that if it's general civil, let's say, and we need to hire a construction inspection, we will go to one after another and give them all a turn rather than do interviews with those in that pool.
Okay. Interesting. So Doug, when you've been interviewing, do you have a preference on whether it's done in person or virtually, or it's selected right off of your SOQ? So, whoops, you're muted there, Doug.
Sorry about that. Well, my personal preference is always to be present in person. Virtual would be a good option. We've all enjoyed getting to use that format and that platform to be more involved in ways that we maybe haven't been before. So we don't want to give that up as a tool. But in talking about interviews and the overall qualifications-based selection, there's different types of projects, and they would warrant different types of interviews or different levels of interviews. I mean, there's capital program projects that would be small and large, and then there's complex contracts where there might be staff augmentation from a consultant or ongoing specific services over a period of time. And I think the larger the project and the more complex the project and the more involved that the consultant firm may play in supporting the municipal staff, the special agency staff, I think it's even more important to have the in-person interviews, because after all, it's about relationships. And if you can't get to know the individuals that are going to be on the team, and that's critical. I think that it's critical that in our success, when we interview for a job, we bring the actual team. And I mean the actual team. It would have to be some kind of very unusual circumstance to ever ask for a substitute once we bring those individuals in for an interview. But we want the agency to see the face, shake the hand, have the conversation, feel out the personality, and see if it's a good fit for the team. Every agency is a little different, and it's fair that they should want to select someone that has all of the qualifications, including the qualifications to be good communicators and to be a good fit for the job. And in an interview, we can always put our best foot forward. We can demonstrate.
So when you're going into the interview, Doug, do you want to know, like there's a short list of 3, do you want to know where you're ranked after the SOQ has been submitted and before the interview, or are you okay with not knowing?
You know, it's sometimes it's more blissful to just not know and always do your best, right? But any information that we can glean or obtain is great. I think that there's always a juggle to know how much by way of resources should go into an interview preparation, preparation materials and so forth. The company I work for can produce the highest possible quality SOQ materials, but is that really what's necessary? And is that actually, would that be a turnoff to that particular agency for that particular project? That has to be assessed. So I think the homework is always being done by those on the private side to get to know who they're going to be talking to and what they may receive. One other point I'll make is that one factor of qualification besides technical qualification is also, are they a known entity? Are they local? Are they available? Those are all qualifications-based factors in addition to the technical qualifications.
Okay. So I guess back to you, Chris, a little bit. So at the start of the interview, do you start your consultants all three with a score of 0? Or is it a score that gets added to their score they got from their written SOQ?
They start from 0. The SOQ gets you to the interview, and the interview is what gets you selected. We do have an impression from having reviewed the statements of qualification about the quality of the firm and what their capabilities are, but we really make the judgment, the decision in the interview.
Okay. And do you let the consultants know where they stand 1 through 3 when they go into the interview, or is it just a short list?
Just a short list.
Okay.
And where they stand 1 through 3 from the SOQ doesn't really matter. To us, it is just who's in the pool, who was selected to be interviewed. And we really are looking forward to the interview as being the much more significant process to do the selection.
Okay. What about you, Tim? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we do it a little differently at CCTA. We actually do a combined weighted score between the proposal and the interview. We feel like the proposal is an important piece to the puzzle in terms of the selection process. And typically we score the proposal mainly based on 3 categories. It's usually qualifications of the firm, qualifications of the team, and then their work plan. And depending on the project, you know, the score, the project and the project manager, that score might vary in terms of either the complexity of the project or the types of the projects in terms of what's important. And then we get to the interview, and we typically have a set of questions. And then from those set of questions, we'll actually have each panel member will score their response to each of those questions. And so what we do is we take the scoring from the proposal, the scoring from the questions, and then we do a weighted combined scoring process to have a final firm or successful firm.
Okay, thanks. So
John,
Doug,
could I add
guess,
something there?
yeah, go ahead.
We also, like Tim, ask a series of questions and we rank them as we go through. And we often find that between the first interview and the third interview, we have observations that we didn't have in the first interview. And we go back and revisit the scoring because we learn more as we listen to each presentation.
Interesting. So Doug, when you're the consultant being scored, what are you generally happy, like, in, just for the audience, like, you know, the typical one is the agency identifies maybe 5 or 6 categories that they score on and what the points are for each of those categories, which may include your project experience, your technical approach, the project manager, resumes of your key personnel, or things of that nature. But I guess, Doug, when you think about the interview and delivering the project, are there key categories that you really emphasize on during the interview and your SOQ, I guess, or what do you feel is the most important?
Well, you know, I trust the agency to know what they're looking for, and sometimes we're selected, sometimes we're not. But one of the things that I think agencies can look at is the statement of qualifications. Pretty much every firm will take advantage of the cover letter to put the key qualifications that they want to highlight. And so it leads, hopefully will lead to questions, even in the interview, because that's kind of our job, right? Is to present with a picture to you of things that you may need or want that you don't even know that you need and want, particularly for one-off projects or complex projects. But I trust the agencies, and so whatever comes about, you know, I think is consulting firms, we accept the results and feel good about just the opportunity to get to an interview.
Okay. Any thoughts about interviews here before we move on to the next set of questions? Or?
I'll add one thought. Sometimes, well, not sometimes, we always consider in the mix of questions, has this consultant worked for us before? And do we have a track record with them? That helps in that process. And we give emphasis to the project manager. We like to see the project manager answer the toughest questions and take the lead in the interview.
Yeah, does the project manager vote on the public agency side carry more weight than the other evaluators, or are they all equal? Tim's shaking his head, so I assume it's all equal at Contra Costa.
Yeah, I think I would say they're equal. Okay. After the interview is finished, we will, after each interview finishes before the next interview, we will have a conversation about our observations, strengths and weaknesses, interesting things pointed out, and we discuss among ourselves what our opinions are and what our views are, and share them. And sometimes they're fairly different, and we explore that to understand. It's a judgment call by each member on the panel, and to understand where they're coming from, we talk about what they observed and why in that interview.
Maybe I can just add, John, one thing that we didn't really talk about is sometimes we'll have a task for project teams during the interview process to help understand how the team actually works together and solving problems during the interview process. So, you know, that's also something that we've done during the interview process. And usually when we do something like that, we may give it to the team and the shortlisted teams in advance so they can prepare. But, you know, and we've also, depending on the project, you know, I think it's also really important to kind of understand, you know, how the team really is working together during the interview process. And I think that comes out in a lot of ways. One is, you know, the presentation materials, and to Chris's point, the project manager kind of taking the lead, and because we want to see how these teams are going to be presenting, because we will be asking these people or these folks to, you know, go to public meetings and present this information and talk about the project. And so I think that's a real important thing that we're trying to get out of the interview. So if a team's coming in and kind of fumbling the project, the interview setup and fumbling the presentation, I mean, that does reflect, you know, on the team as we're kind of looking and choosing who we're going to be working with as part of the overall project. But I think also having, you know, a task, and we've actually been kind of thinking a little bit about this in the future, is because this virtual element is it's a permanent thing. It's not going to go anywhere. And, you know, having an in-person meeting versus a virtual meeting, that's going to happen. That's just part of the project now. And so we're trying to figure out a way during the interview process to try to address that. So we can better understand how the team works virtually as well as in person, because they're two completely different dynamics. And it's going to be important to have good, productive meetings virtually, but also in person. So that's an element that we're trying to figure out as part of our interview process, and how we actually reflect that in the future. And I think other big component of those tasks is at CCTA, we're a very innovative agency. And so a big component of the interview in our mind is, how are you willing to think outside the box? What are the innovative things you're willing to bring to the table? What are some innovative solutions that you have? And so that's a really big component to our interview process, is to really understand, you know, how creative these teams really are to address the solutions and address the problems.
Thanks. So I guess at this point, we've gone through our interviews, we've ranked our consultants, we've identified number one, And in order to get on to negotiations, you need a cost proposal from your consultant. So I guess at what stage in your interview process do you ask for a cost proposal, and kind of what's the format of what you ask for? And Jim, do you want to start that one?
Yeah, we typically, depending on the size of the project, we may ask for the cost proposal from just the successful firm at the end of the process. That's typically how we like to do it. If we're under some sort of schedule constraint as part of the process, whether that be a funding constraint or something like that, we may ask for the sealed envelopes at the interview of the shortlisted firms. And typically, you know, what we're looking for in the cost proposal is, you know, essentially, you know, a cover letter in terms of kind of how it was kind of packaged together. Obviously, if there's federal funding involved, all of the necessary forms and so forth, you know, the 10Hs, the 10Ks, the ICRs, all that stuff. And then I think that, you know, obviously we like to have the final scope of work as part of the cost proposal. And then also we like to see the actual cost in terms of the tasks that are involved that align with the scope of work, obviously the rates and the folks that are involved, the numbers of hours, that all then roll up into the overall cost. And so that's typically what we like to see as part of the cost proposal.
So Chris, do you do a similar thing at the county, or is there anything different that you?
Yes, we don't typically ask for sealed envelopes. We wait until the first firm is identified from the interview process, and we'll ask only that firm for the cost proposal. It's not used in the selection process, and as Tim said, unless we're under an unusually tight schedule, we won't burden the consultants to prepare that before the interview. We similarly like to see all of the tasks spelled out and the hours per task. Our project manager will do the same thing before he sees the consultant's proposal. It's our policy. And then the project manager will review that proposal compared to the consultant's proposal item by item, and evaluate how it fits with our expectations. And there will often be questions. Why did the consultant put 100 hours for this task, whereas we thought it would be 60 hours? And so we have a dialogue. It's open. We call the consultant and we talk to them about the items in their task cost report. And we're open to accepting their information. We just need education often. Why do you think, Mr. Consultant, it takes that level of effort? That surprises us. And if they have good reasons, that's fine. We don't want to shortchange or minimize the hours necessary for a task that really does take those hours.
So you're jumping ahead a little bit, but that's.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good preamble to where we're going.
Okay.
So, if it's a master services agreement and you're going to award a task order, is the task order awarded to one firm, or is that do the firms on your short list or on your on-call agreement compete for those task orders somehow?
Are you asking Tim or me?
Tim, why don't you go ahead?
So the way we typically handle our on-calls is once we've developed a short list of firms, you know, we typically select the firm off the list to do the work, depending on what the scope of the work is. And that's typically how we issue our task orders. Depending on the project, we may recompete among the task orders, but we typically don't do that. We typically, usually based on the short list, like to pick the firm based on the scope of the work and the qualifications of that firm and make sure they're in alignment. That's typically how we handle the task orders. And then on our PMO consultant, we actually have that set up on a task order basis as well. But obviously that's not competitive. We just issue task orders based on the overall contract. So that's typically how we handle a master services agreement.
And Chris, at the county, do you do anything similar or different from that?
Well, as I mentioned before, we have a pool of annual contracts, and we typically only use those for smaller tasks, for things under 100,000. If it's anything complex or of greater magnitude, we do a standalone contract, which is the statement of qualifications, interviews, selection, and negotiation. So our process is a little different than Tim's.
And I guess, Doug, from your side, I guess what types of task order processes or requests for cost proposal do you see, either from a general agreement or from a master services agreement?
Well, there's a variety depending on the agencies. And they're not difficult to prepare, and they're fair to ask for small, straightforward projects that it's difficult to confuse the scope for what it is. However, I'd say that we always would like to have a conversation before we prepare any cost proposal to understand really what are we looking for. Construction management, for example, are we looking for part-time inspection or full-time, or why? And do you want input from us on that before you make that decision? It could be a very simple, straightforward design that's like under the $100,000 category, where it really would be about the same for anybody. But there's just a lot of questions, and a lot of agencies or a lot of consultants would approach it differently if they could have a lengthy discussion and start the negotiation process as they develop a cost proposal.
So it's interesting. I think we're all, like, when I ask about costs, I see people kind of jumping into negotiation and how important communication is. So, so we'll go ahead and start talking about negotiations. And I guess for you, Chris, when you get to that point, like, how do you start the negotiation? Who leads that? And what type of interaction is there? Is it face-to-face or email or over the phone, or how do you typically conduct that negotiation?
The negotiation is done typically between our project manager at the agency and the project manager for the consultant. And telephone, email, whatever works is fine. There is typically a pretty good understanding between us and the consultant after the interview when we select them. And so the process of negotiating is more a process of understanding what the consultant is proposing and why, and asking for education about why are you proposing 10 borings instead of 6 borings for your geotech, and that type of thing. And we're open to being educated, and we want to hear the reasoning and understand the thinking that has gone into it. And it helps us be confident that the consultant has thought it through and knows that it is reality-based and it is good use of public funds. Well, I'll stop there.
Tim, how do you conduct your negotiations at Contra Costa?
Yeah, so on the negotiations part, just in terms of opening the envelope, if we do receive, I'll say 3 envelopes from the shortlisted firms, we typically only open up the envelope of the successful firm. And we do not open the other 2. If we can't reach negotiations with the successful firm, then we'll definitely go to number 2 and open up that envelope and start the negotiation process there. But 9 times out of 10, we typically can reach an agreement with the successful firm. And then once we reach a successful firm, a negotiation with a successful firm, one of our best practices is actually to mail the other 2 envelopes back to the consultant. And we do not hold on to those cost proposals. So we actually mail them back sealed back to the consultants. And so once we actually start the negotiation process, I agree with a lot of what Chris just said. I think we first make sure that the scope is in alignment with what we think about the project. I think it's key to kind of hone in objectively in terms of the assumptions, the scope of work. And once we negotiate the scope, then we'll jump, to the actual cost. So I think the scope is a key element to it. And I think the costs should be a byproduct of the scope. And so I think that's primarily how we do it. Typically on our side, the project manager leads the negotiation phase of the overall process. And that's typically how we do it at CCTA. But I agree with a lot what Chris said in terms of, really it is really an opportunity to make sure that both the successful firm and the agency are on the same page in terms of what the goals of the project, what are we trying to achieve, what are the outcomes going to be, and then learning from each other in terms of, because as the agency, we're aware of all of the issues on the project, but sometimes, or not all the issues, we're aware of, the issues on the project, we may not be aware of a certain issue. And so that's where it's a really good point to really understand collectively as a team where all those risks and where all those mines are in the project, and making sure that we're doing an assumptions and also an exclusions documentation that really goes alongside the scope of work. And I think the other important thing about the scope of work is making sure that there's clear list of deliverables, and then making sure those deliverables are well laid out as part of the cost proposal, as part of every single task, so we can know exactly how much hours and costs are going into against each deliverable.
Thanks, Tim. So Doug, I guess on the private sector side, I guess what are maybe some of your battle stories about negotiations, and how would you like that process to go, and maybe what are some of the struggles you've had with a cost negotiation too? So. Oh, you're muted again, I think, Doug.
Sorry. So I enjoy the negotiation process because that's when you can really start to get into the conversation about the details of the job and how it's to be accomplished. I think it's important that not only is there a experienced lead or principal or even project manager or any role in the project on the consultant side, but likewise on the public agency side, it's important to have somebody that has had some experience with similar projects to what are being negotiated and talked about, because they know really what the costs should be. Now it's a little crazy because everything's more expensive. It's more expensive even to print documents now. It's we have to take those things into account. But the working with somebody that has some maturity of experience makes the negotiations much easier. It helps to develop a starting point that doesn't have the big gap in terms of understanding of what costs could be. I think negotiations can be fairly simple, as a matter of fact, if both sides have an understanding of what's a rational hourly rate for different individuals and what the percentage of different types of experience and billing rates would make sense for the project.
So have you had any training in negotiations?
Just experience. I did personally have an education in negotiating with unions, and I was involved in a lot of negotiations. In a few years I was in aerospace, as well as working for public agencies. and the private sector. So it's just an experience factor, but I think that I can tell when I meet somebody in a public agency or in the private sector, if they have a good sense for what things should cost. And then you can start at that starting point. And it's good if everybody has a realistic budget expectation. If a consultant comes in really high, then you need to talk about why that is, because obviously there's this big gap in understanding as to what the scope is and what's needed to be accomplished. I just got a request from a county agency for, we did a redistricting project for a special district to change their voting districts within the special district. And it's an old district, the largest district in the county of Santa Barbara. And they've got tens of thousands of parcels within this district. Never did do a detailed description, lot line, or lot, I'm sorry, parcel description of every district. It was a map originally drawn on an old county map. And so the county just cavalierly says, you know, provide us with this documentation. We wrote back and says, well, the redistricting effort cost us $11,000 to do, but you're asking for a product for the county now that will cost us between $250,000 and $500,000 to deliver. Is this really what you want? And it's just that gap, not knowing what it is that they're asking for.
So I guess Chris or Tim, do you do any training for the people that are going to be negotiating your costs on the contract?
Tim?
Yeah, we do a little bit of training. When I was the deputy executive director for projects, you know, just, I mean, based on my consultant experience and so forth, I used to sit down with my director of projects and staff to share some historical information that I've collected over the years in terms of, you know, hours per sheet and cost per sheet, and, you know, historical information in terms of you know, gathering historical information on similar projects to make sure that and this, I think this might be diving into some of the other questions, but, you know, diving into, you know, making sure that they have the information available to them to kind of make a judgment call that you know, a study, you know, the planning, environmental, and study phase is always a tricky one. You know, on the design side, it's very structured, right? It's like hours per sheet, cost per sheet. It's very, very structured. So I think it's understanding where the flexibilities are and relative to, you know, the scale and the scope of the overall project, I think is really important. And that's where the experience, I think, really it comes in, you know, to understand where you can be flexible. But I will say that, you know, we do, one thing I didn't mention earlier is we do have a PMO. We're only 20 people here at CCTA. We're a small agency. I like to say we're small but mighty. And so I think that we do have a PMO consultant that has a lot of other extensive senior experience that does help support staff with negotiation process, et cetera, as well. So.
Chris, do you have any training in negotiations that the county does? Or?
We do something similar to what Tim just said, providing information to whoever the project manager is to help him in the evaluation. We try to assign a project manager that has judgment and experience in that area that he will be doing the negotiations. If it's designing a bridge, for instance, he'll need to be someone who has had bridge experience. And if not, let's say this is his maiden voyage, then we'll have someone experienced to come alongside him to help him through the negotiation process. Other than that, we don't have a formal training process for negotiations. It's learn through experience.
Yeah, so it's kind of, it sounds like in general, it's senior people handing down knowledge to more junior people. And it's not really a sink or swim, but it is a an intentional collaboration on the public agency side to at least get that manager prepared to go into the negotiation and share information that you might have to help them do that. So.
Yes, and as that project manager is going through the negotiation process with the consultant, he will or she will consult frequently with others on the team, with in-house staff that has experience for a reality check, or what is your impression of this? Just to make sure that things are reasonable. Our objective is not to get the contract for as cheap as we can get it. It is to get it, is to protect the public resources and to have a reasonable fee. It doesn't have to be a low fee, it has to be reasonable.
So a lot of, yeah, that's kind of the crux of QBX is, or QBS is a fair and reasonable price for what's being asked for. And so I guess towards that, it sounded like, Chris, that you do some type of independent cost estimate in advance of the negotiation or review of the cost proposal. And is that
Yes.
something you do, or? Yeah.
It's our policy that the project manager prepares his own task cost report and identifies the work that will need to be accomplished by task with an estimate of hours and his own overall cost estimate to do the work. And it's necessary as a starting point to understand what you're getting from the consultant.
Tim, do you do independent cost estimate, or?
Yeah, we do. We do a really extensive process when we're establishing the budget for the project. You know, to Doug's point, you know, making sure we don't have these large gaps in terms of cost and expectations. So we do make sure that we're doing our due diligence on our side as we're establishing the budget for the project, that we're accounting for all the different tasks. And we actually set up our budgets by anticipating what contracts we're actually going to need along the entire way of the entire project. And so, and then based on those contracts, we'll actually do independent cost estimates based on those individual contracts, and then compare it based on experience from other projects, etc. I think the one thing that we also do is, in terms of in terms of making sure that we're doing a fair and reasonable, estimate. I know that, like we talked about with Chris and John, in terms of that's the real crux of this. But I think it also, the actual fee as well. I know there's a lot of negotiation typically around the fee of the consultant for a project, and we do look at that in terms of the complexity of the project, the innovation side of the project, whether it's a project that maybe hasn't been done before. And so we, coming from the consultant perspective, I know we want to have a fair and reasonable, but this might sound weird coming from a public agency, but I also want the consultants to make money off the project. That's where you get the incentive. That's where you're going to get the quality. That's where you're going to get the teamwork. And so, so we typically, like, depending on the types of projects we're working on, anywhere from 10 to 12%. And even sometimes we've gone higher based on, the type of project that we've actually put out there. Like, for example, if we did if you know anything about CCTA, we'll do like an autonomous vehicle project or a technology project, and we'll typically assign higher fees to those projects because they're more complex, they have more risk, and typically we will have more fee on those projects.
So Tim, is there a certain amount of time that the agency budgets for negotiations? Like, you've done your selection, like on average, I guess, how much time, how many days does it take to negotiate before you can actually issue the contract?
This is a tricky question. It really is just, based on, if we're based on schedule constraints. I mean, we've done negotiations within, 1 to 2 weeks, but, understanding there's the larger, more complex type projects where, we'll definitely allocate more time for negotiation, whether that be 4 to 6 weeks. But, we want to make sure that we're being fair in the process. We want to make sure that, that the consultant has plenty of time to, address our questions and comments during the scoping phase. And so I think it really just really depends on really if there's a schedule or a time constraint really associated with the overall process. And typically we do have a process in terms of taking it to our board and taking it to a committee, and so we always have to take that into account as we're kind of doing our negotiations to make sure that we've always got time to have a final clean package that we can then insert into our packet production for our committees and board processes.
Chris, do you have anything to add to that, or?
No, I think he said it very well. I agree.
So Doug, I guess on the private sector side, like, how do you prepare for a negotiation, and are there specific steps or preparations that you do to get ready to talk to an agency about your budget? So.
Well, I would guess that most of the firms like ours, there's a lot of homework done. We get to know as familiar with the project as possible. And I'm thinking in terms of larger projects here in my comments, but walking the site and looking at issues that might come up and so forth. So I feel comfortable going into the negotiations, understanding really what from our perspective needs to be done, and including what kind of communications is this going to require through the duration of the project. Some projects require weekly conversations with the public agency to make sure that we're meeting milestones and costs and really expectations towards progress and schedule. But if you think of it in those terms, what we're negotiating for is a relationship over 4 months, 9 months, however long the duration of the project is. And if it's going to require a lot of conversations, a lot of communications, then it's going to be more hours that have to be allocated for that. And so in preparation, we go in with an idea in mind that really you can't be successful for anything less than these hours. And we think in terms of hours, then we calculate them out. So we don't know what the fee is going to be till we know the hours. And typically there's a meeting of the minds and talking it through, everyone agrees. And sometimes what you can do is break it down into smaller pieces and say, well, let's contract for phase 1, because we don't know what phase 2 will look like until phase 1 is complete. Way to do a cost negotiation on a complex project.
Is there a point where you have to walk away? And like,
it would only happen with smiles on our faces and handshakes, because you've got to leave the room with everybody's got to have a good feeling, because what's happened is either it's possible the consultant just simply can't do it that inexpensively, or it could be that the budget expectations need to shift. The paradigm of that needs to shift, and the agency may need to go back and rethink the budget or the scope. But there ought to be, there's all professionals. We all do similar type work, and we all kind of know what our responsibilities are. And I can't recall ever a negotiation where we walked away or it was an uncomfortable end to the negotiation. I can't recall that ever happening.
So it sounds like, I think you've answered a few of my other questions there, but really it's having an understanding of the scope, the tasks that go into it, the effort, and where you see differences. The key to resolving that is communication. It seems like you all are good communicators, and that's a pretty essential part of the negotiation. And if you can do those things, then in all likelihood, the negotiation is going to be successful, it sounds like. So
that's correct.
Yeah.
We have also
go ahead, Chris.
We've never not come to agreement with a consultant either. at least in transportation, that I'm aware of.
Yeah. What about you, Tim? Is it common to go on to number 2?
As far as I've been here, we've always been able to negotiate with a successful firm.
And so that's, it's, again, it's fair and reasonable, right? Like that is kind of the litmus test. It's hard to describe, but you know it when you have it, I think, right? And there's a serious obligation to look out for the public funds. And I think from the consultant side, it's to do a reasonable effort for the fees that you have available. When we look at master services agreements, and we've had various members of our agency, ACEC, struggle at the task order level because some agencies will ask for multiple proposals and it's not as formal as the interview process and the SOQ process that goes on to form that master services agreement. But when you're awarding task orders, I guess, how do you do that? And do you ever ask for additional qualifications or resumes? Is it different for a design contract versus a construction management contract, or any thoughts about that? And I'll let you start on that one, Chris.
All right. We do on occasion ask for more information from consultants in that pool to make sure that their staff is available, that the timing is good for them. And as I said before, they've already gone through the competitive selection process to get into that pool. And so we don't do interviews again. We will ask them a few questions to make sure that it's a good fit for that firm to receive this task. We don't do interviews. We may ask for resumes of some key people that they're proposing to work on that task.
Tim, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, pretty similar to Chris. We don't ask for, additional proposals or even scope of works from multiple consultants on our bench. We typically, identify the firm based on, the qualifications relative to the actual specific project. And then similar to what Chris is saying, we'll ask them a series of questions, make sure that it's the right fit, make sure that the staff that they presented in their proposal are available, and then if there is some unique task, to the project, like for example, I can actually specifically put out an example. We have a project that had a major structures component to it, and so we actually took the work and actually split the work so we essentially took 2 firms that were on our on-call list and actually combined them together into a single team to address the scope of the project, because there was a large structures component to the overall project. And so one firm didn't necessarily have the structures qualifications, and so another firm had the structures qualifications, and so we actually ended up combining it together to address the overall scope of the project. And so that was one recent experience that we had. But yeah, it's typically done on a I'll call it an ad hoc basis in terms of what the project is and the available firms on our bench.
So I have you, Tim, I guess, do you have any special controls that you use for managing the costs as the work is done, or do you rely on your consultants to keep you informed, or what's that look like? How do you know that you're not going to get surprised at the end, I guess, with additional costs?
So we do have project controls. We have a project management system called eBuilder that we use at CCTA. Some of you may be familiar with eBuilder, but we have all of our consultants submit costs by task into eBuilder, and then we're able to dashboard that out in terms of earned revenue and project and performance for the overall invoice and overall project. And then our project manager will also meet with the consultant on a regular basis, to review physical complete versus percent complete, just to make sure that we're, on track with the work, relative to the progress of the invoicing for the project.
Chris, anything similar? Or?
We do keep tabs with the consultant as work is progressing. We have, and we do it by telephone or email. Typically, each month we talk about the progress on the work. And again, our on-call or our task order projects are smaller, so the scopes are less complex. If we were going to design a bridge, we wouldn't do it through our task order process. It would be a standalone request for qualifications, interviews, and a standalone contract. And we do have regular interaction with the consultant to make sure that as questions arise, they are able to stay productive by getting guidance from us as to what our goals are, and what often there's information that we know that they don't know that we know. And so by having frequent interaction and discussions, we're able to inform them and help them hit the nail on the head.
Okay. Good. Doug, anything to add on cost control? Or?
No, it's just that every client we have has a different method, and so some are better than others, but they're all good, and it's helpful to the consultant to be able to report weekly, monthly, maybe with their invoicing monthly, what's the percent complete compared to the percent expended as a minimum. And it's important that for the satisfaction of the customer and for our success moving forward, to maintain the perception of being qualified and our reputation, that we be cost effective. And so I always enjoy the cost control part of it, because that's something that we can talk about and feel good about. And once you get past that, then you can focus on the fun stuff, which is, how's the project progressing, and what's the problem solving we have to do this week just to get the job done.
Okay.
John, I got something to add real quick. Just two things, maybe to pile on here relative to cost control. Two things. One is don't be bashful about bringing up out of scope work. I think that's a really important factor. I always remind the project managers that, because as project managers, sometimes our project managers are asking the consultants to do work that's not in the contract. And I know that out of the goodness of your heart, you might do it anyways. Because as I was a consultant before, and I would always do out of scope work. And so, but I think it's important to make sure that there's good open dialogue in terms of when there's out of scope work, and when out of scope work is being requested of you during the process of the project. And I think that's really a really important point in terms of cost controls, and that there's no surprises at the end. I know at CCTA, especially when it's early on in the project, we'll keep a table or tabulate, out of scope work as we're kind of moving through the process, and then we can decide on, how to address that out of scope of work, whether we do a budget reallocation or whether we go to the board and get a contract amendment. And so we've always been really successful with getting contract amendments from our boards for most of these projects. The second one is, and now that I've been on the public sector side for about 5 years now, I really appreciate the auditing process that we have to go through on an annual basis. And so it's really important that, that consultants just understand where we're coming from, our perspective, in terms of the processes that we have to go through, or maybe some of the additional paperwork that we might request from you. Because, having to gone through 5 single audits on our agency on an annual basis for the past 5 years, there's a lot of work and a lot of input that goes into that. And it's really important to our agency that we get a clean audit on an annual basis. So something I didn't really understand on the private sector side, that I have a more appreciation on the public sector side.
Okay, well, I think we got time for a question or two. So Jen has been monitoring the chat. I see a lot of questions, but maybe she has a favorite one or two we can try to answer here real quick.
Yes, thank you, John. There are a number of questions, and I know we're getting close to the end here on timing. So we'll try to get one or two questions answered quickly. But if your question has not already been answered during the webinar, or if we're not getting to it right now, we will be sure to follow up with you either in the chat within this week or follow up with you directly. So do not worry, we will get back to you if we haven't gotten to answer your question today. But with that, John, so looking at some quick questions that we might be able to have answers for, and please let me know if it has already been answered and I might have missed it. But one question that came in was for our agency speakers today. Do you ask each consultant teams the same questions, or do they vary based on what was given in the proposal?
So I think Tim said yes. And Chris, do you have canned questions prepared ahead of time or not?
We do prepare questions ahead of time, and we do ask each team the same questions. However, based on the answers to the questions, we will then pursue things that make sense to pursue. So the discussions can be quite different, even though they all start with the same questions.
Doug, do you have any skills for sending the message you want to the question, whether it's what was actually asked or not?
You know, there's always the questions you want them to ask, and they don't ask. So you find some way to work that information in, but you always have to answer the question too.
You get another one?
Yes, yeah. Another question here for our agency folks, and Doug, if you have insight as well. The question is, how do you phrase questions to the firms to try to figure out or measure how creative or innovative the team or the approach is for the project?
Sounds like a good one for you, Tim, while you're having them vote each other off the island. What do you come up with?
So I mean, innovation can really happen, like, you know, in a lot of different ways. But I mean, some of the things that we'll ask is, you know, is there, you know, an innovative approach, you know, to either streamlining or making a process, you know, more efficient. Another one might be how to, you know, leverage or add technology to the project to make it, you know, either perform better or be better. And I think sometimes we'll even ask questions about, you know, innovation in terms of, you know, outreach and education and those types of things. I think there's a lot of new tools relative to, you know, outreach and education. And so those are just some of the more innovative things that we might ask those types of questions. And then, but I think when it comes to, you know, more the technology side of it, we may ask specific questions about your approach, whether that be about system architecture or data architecture, or a specific vendor or solution that you may have as part of your team. So that's some of the follow-up questions that we might have for the consultants.
Okay, Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
One area, in addition to what Tim just said, that often is a challenge in projects is the regulatory environment and navigating through permits or funding authorization and that type of thing. And so we'll sometimes ask consultants, how will you solve this? For example, if we have tight time constraints, how will you get this permit from the regional board in a timely way? Just as an example, there are many administrative hurdles that have to be solved, as well as the technical. And sometimes the administrative are harder than the technical to resolve. And we like to hear creative ideas or possible past successes that they've done, how they've met those types of obstacles.
I guess I'm just going to get ready to turn it over to Miranda, but before we do, does anybody have a one sentence advice for negotiating or getting prepared? Doug, I'll let you start off with that one. So.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, I've always been a believer in QBS in my public sector career as well as my private career, because it's always resulted in more satisfactory projects and higher quality projects and more cost-effective projects, without exception. Those that feel that pinching a penny will make a difference. At some point in everyone's career, you reach a point where, you know what, we just want the best qualified. We want to get the thing done, and we want to get it done with the least amount of pain and suffering for all of us, but also so that we can have joy in it. And right now I'm pointing out things to my kids and my grandkids that I was involved in, and drives them crazy probably, but wouldn't have gotten to this point in my career had there been roadblocks on, you know, minor cost issues. What was important was the qualifications and the capability to get us there.
All righty. Chris, you got a final word?
I would just say a key. First, I support QBS all the way. It is truly the way to go to come to have a good outcome in the finished design, to allow and to facilitate the consultant's creativity and their ability to use their judgment and experience to come up with the best design, rather than be constrained by dollars. Like if you were going in for a surgery, you don't want the surgeon to say, well, I can only do these things to help you because the insurance company won't approve such and such. You want what you need. And it's similar here. Communication is vital. Continuous flow of communication between the consultant and the agency maintains the trust and helps avoid tangents or non-productive work.
Okay. Tim, you got a final word?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, a common phrase that I tell my staff is, you know, don't be penny wise, pound foolish. You know, make sure that we're being reasonable in the negotiation phase. Make sure we're capturing all the costs, because if we don't capture it in the design phase, then we're going to pay twice as much in the construction phase for it. So, right. So I always really make sure that don't be bashful, be open, be transparent. And sometimes clients don't, I mean, from a consultant perspective, don't tell us what we want to hear. Tell us what you think about the project, and what your opinions are in terms of how to getting the work done and making sure that it's complete, it's comprehensive. So that way we're not, you know, paying, like I said, paying for twice as much. Like, for example, there was one project that we had before I got here at CCTA, and we didn't include enough potholing in the design phase, and we suffered from it in the construction phase, you know. And so, so as you're negotiating the project, you know, if you really think it needs 36 potholes and it's going to cost us $50,000 for 36 potholes or whatever the case may be, then just, you know, make sure I would just say that, you know, and be adamant about it, because it's going to save us more cost down the line in terms of the construction phase of the project.
Okay, well, thank you all. A lot of information to decipher and a lot more we could talk about, of course, but time is up, and we've put Miranda under the gun here to wrap things up, so I'll hand it off to her quickly. And thank you. So.
Thank you, John. I'll speed read here to get us through this fairly quickly, but I do appreciate the insight and internal processes shared by our panelists today. It's very informative, and I hope beneficial to many of the agencies and consultants who are present today. Before we close, I did want to acknowledge and thank the director of ASCE Region 9, Ken Rosenfield, who did participate in most of the call today, but unfortunately had to jump off early for another meeting. but he wanted me to share a brief statement, and here it goes. So he says, this has been a great seminar on an important topic of qualifications-based selection. Thank you to ACEC for setting this seminar in motion, and thank you for allowing ASCE and APWA to support the event. ASCE Region 9 represents over 16,000 civil engineers in California, and we have long supported QBS. ASCE maintains approximately 165 public policy statements, and public policy number 304 addresses qualifications-based selection. We first adopted this policy over 35 years ago and fully support it. We look forward to participating in future educational seminars. So with that, if you have any questions about QPS or the information shared today, please feel free to reach out to our Policy Outreach Director, Jennifer Horn, and she'll be happy to assist you and get back to you. And once again, thank you all for joining us today, our co-hosts, our speakers, the planning group. This was a great event, and we look forward to seeing you at future educational seminars similar to this.